Borderlands 2 is one of, if not the best titles within the franchise. Whether it's the story, the gameplay, all the loot, the characters, there are so many really good aspects that come with Borderlands 2. However, there are some downfalls that come with the game, as do many of the other titles in the franchise. One issue is pertaining to the element of Slag, and how people don't like the use of Slag within Endgame, and how it's basically seemed as required. In this video, we're going to be going over the element of Slag, and how it can be used to improve the gameplay and the fluidity of Endgame in Borderlands 2, in specific, or in future titles if Slag is implemented.
Officer Bowles.
I think the first question we have to ask is, why does it feel bad to use Slag? Now, a lot of people might say, oh, it's because it's required in Endgame and you actually have to use Slag. And at that point, I would have to disagree with you. I will elaborate on that point further when we go into the points of improving Slag. But I feel like what the real issue with Slag is, it is double jeopardy punishing. Now, what do I mean by that? Say that you have a Slagger, and you want to slag a target. You first have to swap to the Slagger. After you swap to the Slagger, you then have to shoot the enemy and then hope they get slagged. After that, you have to switch back to a different weapon in order to deal damage to the enemy and hope they do not get unslagged within that duration. While all of that is happening, you are then still getting shot by the enemy you're slagging or other enemies around you. Do you see the problem that is present here? There is just too much downtime in order to do something that is quote-unquote required, and it just really ruins the fluidity of the game. It's also very important to be able to use every second that is available to you, because in OP levels you get health gated very fast and you need to be able to act quick. With Slag, it makes you end up doing really stupid mistakes and leads to you either going into a fight for your life or ultimately just end up dying. This also applies to raid bosses, as raid bosses even have less of a chance to be slagged. So when you're fighting a raid boss and you slag them, you might have a chance to do like maybe a shot or two, but at the end they just get unslagged and then they just hit you with a one-tap Nova out of nowhere. I'm looking at you, Veracitus. You fucking suck. The other issue with Slag is that it ends up taking a weapon slot in your inventory. On paper, this doesn't seem that bad, as there's probably millions of Slag weapons that you can use that are really good. However, there aren't really a lot of variety of good weapons to use in that slot. You're either going to be using the Grog Nozzle, because not only are you getting Slag, but you're getting healing, so it's the best utility item to use. Or if you have characters that have really good healing outside of that, like a Krieg or maybe even an Axton, if you set it up correctly, you only need to use a Slagger. So in the end, you're not really getting a lot of variety of Slag weapons to use in that slot, so it really makes it feel like you're limiting yourself to those types of weapons, or you're limiting to what guns you can have in your inventory slot. And for a game that's marketed for millions and billions of guns, you're really limiting yourself to 3 guns that you want to use, and then 1 gun you have to use because of the endgame. People may say, but the Vault Hunters have ways to slag enemies through their skill trees, and that is true. Axton has Double Up, and Double Up allows his turrets to have slag. Maya has Ruin, which when she face locks an enemy, they end up getting slagged. Zero has Kunai, with the addition of Deathmark, not only has a small chance to slag, but also ends up adding a debuff similar to Slag. So there are ways for Vault Hunters to end up slagging without having a slag weapon in their inventory. However, sometimes it's very inconsistent and or doesn't work on raid bosses. For example, Maya can't use Ruin on Haterax. If she tries to, nothing happens, he doesn't get slagged. And if she uses it on like a Xyperus or like a Veracitus, it only lasts for a second or two. Axton's turret, which is a really good slag skill compared to a lot of the other Vault Hunters, it still relies on the turrets being able to hit the correct shots onto the enemies you want to attack, and or the turrets not being destroyed within that time span. And for Zero, as I mentioned previously, it's a very small chance for the Slag to happen. Although Kunai and Deathmark are really good skills that allow you to do more damage, but Slag is just a better debuff compared to using Kunai and Deathmark. With all of those points being said about Slag, I think now we can go and start delving into how we can solve it and or aspects that we can use to apply and improve Slag. The first example I want to mention is not actually from the Borderlands franchise, but is from a game called Doom Eternal. The reason I'm mentioning Doom Eternal is because it has a lot of these utility type abilities similar to Slag, and they are required like Slag in Endgame. However, it actually amplifies the gameplay and makes it more interactive for the player when they actually play the game. The Doomslayer has 5 unique utility abilities within the game, and they are all technically required in order to fight all of these different types of demons. I'm going to go and list through all of them and explain why they are so good and why they're so beneficial. The first one I'm going to mention is the Flame Belch. The Flame Belch basically allows you to set demons on fire, and when you shoot the demons while they're on fire, you get armor from it. So what this basically allows you to do is do crazy amounts of damage with your gun and also get armor from it. This is just very beneficial. The second one I would like to mention is the grenade. Now, you may say, oh, a grenade, that's just a regular source of damage, but in this game it's actually really useful for its utility. And what the grenade does is not only does it do damage to the demons, but it also allows you to stagger them. So when you stagger the demons, you're able to start shooting at them while they're still stuck in an animation not being able to attack you. And this makes it so much easier when fighting bigger demons, so they don't just obliterate your health bar and you have to go and find it through other means. Another grenade type is the Ice Bomb. And the Ice Bomb, it's just a better version of the grenade, as you're allowed to freeze a bunch of demons, do increased damage towards them, and then once they die, you end up getting health from them at the end. Then you have the Chainsaw. It allows you to go and chainsaw a lower level demon and allows you to get ammo from it. And the importance of this is not only just the ammo, but it allows you to be invincible and actually see what's going around in your surroundings, and you know how to make your next move, especially in harder difficulties. And then finally, there is the Blood Punch. Now what the Blood Punch does is it not only just knocks back enemies and stuns them, but it also removes specific armor pieces, because in Doom Eternal, some demons have specific things, like the Arachnotron has its little turret, and then you have the Cyber Mancubus demon, which has its armor, and you can punch through it and just kill them straight up, and also just get health from it. And that's just another really good utility. So all of these utilities have 2 things in common. One, it allows you to stop the enemy from attacking you and allows you to think about what's going around in your surroundings. And the second is you're still able to do damage while using these utilities and debuffs on the enemy. A second example is actually something that is in the Borderlands franchise, and that is Cryo, specifically from the pre-sequel. Now the reason I mentioned Cryo is because Cryo is actually the best debuff in the franchise if there's any other element that does debuffing. What it does is it slows down the movement of the enemies and or completely makes them frozen solid. So not only does it stop them from attacking you, but then you can also go and attack them really easily. And not only that, but you also get increased damage for crit shots. So when you hit them in the head, it does even more damage. And also, you do not have to swap off of a cryo weapon. And in fact, a lot of weapons are really good if you just get them in a cryo element, like the longest yard, or if you just use like an absolute zero, as they still do crazy amounts of damage even though the enemy is debuffed with the element. Unlike Slag, where when they are slagged, you have to switch off of the slag weapon because it's just better to use a matching element to their enemy's health bar. With these 2 examples in mind, it actually helps us understand how to improve Slag and actually make it a better element in future games, and or how it would impact Borderlands 2. And here are some of these solutions. The first change I would like to make is to allow Slag to do actual damage on Slag targets. Now what do I mean by that? If you guys didn't know, when you use Slag on a slagged enemy, you actually don't do the bonus damage that you're supposed to. Instead of doing 3 times, I believe it's like 1.5 or something like that. It is reduced damage comparatively. Now, the reason I would want to increase this is so that you don't always have to switch off of the Slag weapon. And it also just makes other weapons more useful. For example, if you get like a Slag Lyuda or a Slag Sledge's shotgun, you can actually use the gun and not have to go and farm for a matching element version of that weapon. But it is still keeping the same idea of using matching element weapons. It is not an end-all be-all solution on, oh, let's just use Slag only. It is just something that will help you in mid-fight where you slag an enemy and you want to just do quick damage to them. That's just one solution I have. The second solution I have is to add alternative utility abilities to Slag weapons. We need more variety of weapons that are similar to the Grog. Not necessarily with its healing, but also with abilities maybe such as like shooting a big Slag Nova that slags enemies and does a good amount of damage, or something similar to the Grog with a drunk effect, and maybe some other ability like movement, or something that helps slow the enemy down like Daze in Borderlands 1. That was a really good debuff type attack, but it was just kind of forgotten about ever since Borderlands 1, and it would be really awesome if they implemented that back into Borderlands 2. The third thing they need to do is they need to change Slag chance accordingly. Since Slag is kind of required in higher OP levels, if you make it so that the Slag chance is a lot higher, then there would be less of this double jeopardy punishing towards the player, and it would actually make the game feel more fluid, as you will be able to actually slag someone and then feel rewarded for slagging them. And then finally, the last thing I want to mention, which is not as important, is something to spread slag. And I mentioned this is for builds similar to Krieg's melee build, where he's in Release the Beast mode for the majority of the time and can't slag enemies. It would be really good if there was some type of weapon or utility that would allow slag to spread even while he is in Release the Beast form. Of course, there are betties and stuff like that to spread slag, but they're very inconsistent sometimes, and they don't really spread slag that well. So if there was something that Krieg or maybe other melee builds would be able to use to shoot the enemy and then have the effect of it spreading to others, kind of like maybe an item like the Plague or something like that, that would be a cool item, then I feel like a lot of melee builds, especially in OP levels, would be fixed, like just entirely, because slag would be easier to apply and it allows melee build to do more damage. After considering all of these different solutions, I think these are probably some of the best ways slag could be changed, as there are definitely some fundamental issues with slag. However, I don't think it is an issue of it being required as much as it is just a poor designing of this element of slag itself. Now, I would like to hear what you guys have to say in the comments, because I feel like this issue is not really talked about a lot, and it's just chucked up to something that isn't really the main issue of slag. Anyways, guys, I appreciate you guys watching this video, and I'll talk to you all later.